Welcome to VPG's Virtual Water Cooler Chat Podcast, a platform that features professionals across a variety of industries and promotes growth mindset principles with a central pillar of championing the achievements of women. Our conversations explore a wide spectrum of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, creating a vibrant mosaic that enriches our collective understanding and strengthens our commitment to growth and empowerment. Today, we're speaking with Nick Groombridge, a founding partner of Groombridge, Wu, Baughman Stone LLP. Nick has been lead counsel in over 150 patent cases in federal district courts, has tried dozens of bench and jury trials, and has argued more than 30 cases in the federal circuit. He has litigated patents across a wide range of life sciences and other technology areas, including pharmaceuticals, biologics, drug delivery systems, genetic analysis, and medical devices, and serves as an adjunct professor at NYU Law School. Let's get started.
Good morning, Nick. How are you doing? Thank you so much for accepting my invite to be on the virtual water cooler chat.
Ashley, thank you for the invite, and I'm fine, and it's great to be here, right? And great to be chatting with you.
I see that you're in your office.
I am, right, yes. Sometimes I actually do. I come to the office. That's a little facetious. I enjoy being in the office, right? Because actually having an office feels like it's not something I should take for granted.
I've actually been to your New York office, visiting different people. And that's how I met, actually a group of your folks, but especially the young paralegals who I just interviewed or chatted with. And let me just tell you that they are very energetic.
They are fantastic, and we are so fortunate to have them. But one of the things that's great is the way they interact with each other and the kind of esprit de corps, right? Which makes me happy every time I walk past where they are and wave hello. And this is a room full of big smiles, and people seem like they're enjoying themselves. So I'm very pleased to see that in the workplace.
I think that is so important, especially in we have been in litigation for a long time. You have been in litigation longer than I have, but I am no stranger to patent litigation. I used to be patent litigation paralegal and a case manager before I started my own firm and doing consultancy and tweak filing for patent practitioners. I have also some young folks that sometimes the things that we deal with is pretty heavy. Like I just informed a client that you give me an exhibit that is highly confidential, attorney eyes only. I do not believe is a district court. Thank God it's not ITC. That's a totally different ball game. Yeah. So I'm like, you either need to get a redacted version or we're going to have to not include this because you don't have a default protective order. And those are the things I'm also trying to teach my kids.
Yes.
My kids at my firm, you need to pay attention to this, you need to pay attention to this. But I thought that it was so interesting before getting into you. When I interviewed or chatted with John, Crystal, and Theo, each one of them has a very distinctive personality. And but what I've learned so much is that they have learned so much from being around patent litigators like yourself and your team.
Well, that's great. And I'm sure they all have bright futures ahead of them, right? I think certainly a few of them are headed off to law school fairly soon, right? But what we would hope is that people can come away from their experience here feeling like they learned and that they had a good time, even though, as you well know, oftentimes it's intense, right? Particularly if you're gearing up for a trial or something like that.
I think, I don't want to spill anything, but I asked the paralegal team to review some of the shorts and then get management approval because sometimes, people, especially instant, we could just upload it onto YouTube or Instagram, but I'm like, you need management approval.
Well, I appreciate that, but we try to be in the habit of saying yes to things, not to be obsessively worried about how the world might view us. I'm sure you'll be finding that those things do get management approval.
I love that, but I have also been in the litigation for so long, so I'm in the more old school of thoughts. Yes. So I just rather be safe than sorry. I think some of the times that my clients and friends they appreciate that particular perspective. Why are you so paranoid? I'm like, well, I'm all about risk management.
Fair enough, right? Fair
Yes.
enough. And that,
Yes.
I don't, a good practice.
Yes. And then, which was kind of like a good segue to talk about the title
Yeah.
of this podcast episode is Building a New Kind of IP Law Firm. Want to talk about why you choose that title?
I mean, my great goal is that that's what we are doing. I spent 20 years in big law and they were happy years. And, I don't look back on that with any regret. But I think we came to the place of saying we'd like to see if we can create something that's different, culturally different, and maybe economically different while keeping the very high level of practice, of an extremely high caliber of lawyering. We can sort of dig into those in a little bit more detail, but ultimately what we're trying to do is say, can we create a law firm and a work environment that's different from anything that existed before we got going? And we're headed off on that path, right? I think I'm very pleased with where we are so far, but one of the great things about doing this is complete freedom in the sense of, we can do whatever we want. And if it doesn't work, we'll know not to do it again, right? There is
I do.
a palpable sense of kind of think about what you want and then let's try it, right? And I always encourage, within bounds, but I would encourage people to say, let's experiment with things and see, the only way you find out you innovate really is by experimenting. And some of that will be good and some of it you'll look at and say, we started out with good intentions and expectations, but this wasn't really the way to get to where we wanted to be, so let's not do it again. Culturally, I think, that's a big part of what informs the law firm. There are some kind of more immediate reasons. I kind of felt like I was ready for something different. There's a set of constraints that you have in big law firms for good and proper reasons. And I was at two excellent law firms, Weil Gotshal and then Paul Weiss. They were, the top of the profession. And I still have many friends at both of those places. But there's a set of management constraints that, for example, make it hard to keep people and to promote people. And just the economics of that sort of large practice mean that there are pressures. And I spent a long time trying to hold together the group of people that worked with me over 20 years. And I think I had some success, but I had come to a place where I wanted to say, I want the ability to promote people more and to have greater inclusion than I felt was possible, given the economic realities of large law firms. And that was one of the precipitating events. It's no accident that the very first thing we did was to promote to partner two of our colleagues, who I think Megan and Josie, who and that because again, to me, it just exemplified that. I thought, they very much deserve to be partners, but in a large law firm, there's the ability to promote has to be, for good reasons, has to be tightly controlled, and we're not subject to that constraint. So the biggest single motivator for me at this point in my career is how do I provide the conditions and the assistance for my colleagues to prosper, to grow professionally and to thrive. And that's a big part of what motivated me.
I see that when I visited the firm. Megan and Surab is actually a friend of mine.
Yes.
And we serve on the PTAB Bar Association together. And then I'm going to be interviewing him too. I told him that I will be like Groombridge, who's like single press team.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Well, he's a great guy, and
he's so quiet though.
He's reserved, right? But when you get him talking,
his opinion,
he has lots of great stories to tell.
Yes.
Right?
At first, I was like, should I approach Nick Groombridge? Because I wonder if he's going to say yes or no, right? But hey, nothing mentioned, nothing gained. Maybe he'll say yes. And then before I actually invite you, I search on the internet and figure out, what other podcasts have you done? And I listened to Daryl Lim's The Profiles in Leadership series, and where you talk about like inclusivity and a lot of the amazing culture. Because I've been to like several big firms. I started in construction litigation, believe it or not. And then, I know. And then I went to GW and did an evening program for the paralegal studies. And then my professor then he was an adjunct, but he was an associate at Morgan Lewis. And at the end of the course, he asked me, hey, do you think you're going to get into patent law? I'm like, I don't know anything about patent law. He said, well, you did well enough in my class. I think you should really consider this. You don't know anything about construction either. You seem to be doing it well. Litigation is litigation. So that's how I actually got into patent law. And I applied at Harry at the time and immediately got, like, before I even took the metro home, I got an offer. So that was really awesome.
You must have aced the interview, right?
I asked a lot of questions.
I'm not surprised. Right.
A lot of questions. Most of the time, I'm pretty reserved. And so for me to actually host a podcast, I think that was something that is not something that I ever expected. I think that I totally see what you mean and I share the sentiment. It's the empowerment that we have when we have our own, we can set our own boundaries. And if we make a mistake, we just have to own it and move forward.
Right.
Learn lessons too, right? So from Daryl's interview, I learned that you're also immigrant from UK, or maybe not.
I am. Okay. No. I'm absolutely. I grew up in the UK and I came to live in the US when I was 23 or 24. I've lived here ever since. I now do refer to myself as an immigrant. Interestingly, it was not until really the first Trump administration and the events of that, and also Brexit, which was very much motivated by negative sentiments towards immigrants. Though that era made me change how I referred to myself and start to say I am an immigrant. Sometimes I'd get into conversations with people and they'd start moving in that direction of, you can tell where this is headed. They're going to say bad things about immigrants. And I would say, before you get there, you should know I am an immigrant, right? So you say bad things, right? Like, you're saying them about me, right? And look, obviously I'm a white man and I've enjoyed some success. So I certainly don't, I'm not trying to wrap myself in the mantle of the experience of other people. But at the same time, I wanted to say, if you're going to be negative towards immigrants, you should understand some of them look like me. And you're saying bad things about lots of people of whom you know nothing. I do think it's important to say, to challenge people when they start off down that path of stereotyping and saying those who come from somewhere else are in some way lesser. I feel it's important to confront that. And it plays into an experience that, again, I'm very privileged, but there are many times when I will be in a meeting and I have the sense I'm the only person in this room who's not an American. And there's value to understand that feeling of I'm the only person in this room who's like me, because, every woman in the business world has felt that, right? Every minority person has felt that, right? And again, I'm not trying to say my experience, approximates theirs, but just being able to have some understanding of what it's like to feel there's a club here and I'm not sure that I belong in it is helpful in terms of creating conditions, for understanding what it's like for other people.
I really appreciate that. I mean, I think your accent gives you away. My accent and my look, everything gives me away.
Right.
So most of the time when I walk into like meeting or like talking to people, I tend to be very verbose, and so I get very self-conscious.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my God, do I actually belong?
Right.
And, the thing is, I read from Brene Brown, if you go into a place and you think that you don't belong, you already not belong.
Correct.
Right?
And you're on the defensive, right? One of the things I love about talking to you is that you are so self-confident and you're never at a loss for what to say. But even someone with those attributes, I know from personal experience, one feels, am I in the right place, right? I'm not like these people, and what do they think about me, right? It's just useful, I believe, to be able to have that experience because it helps one understand what it's like for others.
Yeah, and I think because I'm not an attorney, but a lot of time people actually mistaken me as an attorney. And I always have to, when I study like paralegal studies, the first thing that they teach you about ethics, because it's also under ABA model rules. You're supervised under attorneys. The first thing you need to do is disclose that you are not an attorney in a law firm so that the public does not misconceive that, have a perception that you are an attorney and accidentally provide legal advice, because that would constitute unauthorized practice of law. So that's actually over the years, it just does some number to your mindset. So the first thing I would go is like, I'm not an attorney.
Right. You should understand I'm not an attorney. Now let's have a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. You're a lawyer. We can totally talk legal. Because you decided for yourself. Thank you. That was amazing. And I really appreciate you basically let me know that you think that I am confident, especially when it comes to work. I think in terms of like my self-identity, I have a lot more work to do.
I think that's true of everyone, even people who, I mean, look, maybe there's some small proportion of people who are genuinely have no self-doubt. I'm not sure that I want to be friends with those people because they've probably got other problems. But yeah. Most people, you can be very confident and be able to engage in a conversation or take charge of a room, but it still have inside you that voice saying, do I belong here? Right. Yes. And I think most people are like that. And I think it's good to remember that, right? That we're all much more the same than we are different.
I totally agree. Now, you talk a little bit about you coming to the States at 23 and 24. Did you come here to study and decided that this is the place that you wanted to be? And what did you study when you were in college?
So I studied law, and in England, that's an undergraduate degree. So I went off to college at the age of 18, and I studied law for 3 years. And after that, I decided I would see the world. And so I sold my possessions, such as they were, and bought a one-way ticket to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And I lived in Brazil for a couple of years, which was a very formative experience. It was a great experience. And on my way back, I was going to London. I passed through New York and I met the person who is now and has been for many years my wife. We had a bit of a transatlantic relationship for a while. And in 1984, I came to the US thinking it would be just for a few months. And the plan was that she was still in college, that she would graduate and we would move to London. In January of 1984, we got married. We didn't tell our parents. My recollection is I called my parents afterwards and said, good news, you saved a lot of money on a wedding. And so I started looking for work. I could, but it turns out that if you tell potential employers that you only plan to be in the country for 6 months, it doesn't make you very hireable. And the only job I could get was as a temporary paralegal. My first, and it turned out to be only assignment, which was originally meant to be for a week, was to go to a law firm that turned out to be an IP boutique. And I don't think I even knew that patent law existed, but I turned up at this law firm and started working there, and one thing led to another, and they extended the time. And for a set of reasons, we weren't able to move to London that summer. And eventually the law firm offered me a job if you could pass the bar exam, we'll make you an associate. And that happened. And eventually I became a partner. So I was at that law firm for 17 years. I would say my entry into the profession was non-traditional, right? So I worked my way up, right? And learned patent law along the way.
That makes so much sense about how your paralegals have such a positive feedback about the culture. I think that is very important. I've seen actually 80% of my friends are attorneys because I'm a workaholic. So I really didn't used to have friends outside of work, except for the people that, I knew along the way, when I was in college and things like that. So when you're working crazy hours at law firms and your surroundings are going to be the people at work. So work culture is so important. I remember during one of the other interviews, John was actually talking about, I'm just fascinated as how lawyers can actually go into Baughman and argue about one word for an hour. And then also shared about the story that you seem to have an internal clock about how fast you have spent on a slide. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
When you're in court, in many situations, time management is very, very important. I mean, most trials now done in a way that you get a fixed amount of time. And so if you spend too long with one witness, that's time you can't spend with another one. And so I have trained myself, or I've tried to train myself, to be very attentive to how long I'm spending on things, and to also to encourage others to be like that, and to say, first of all, be realistic realistic. Lawyers and indeed non-lawyers will always tend to underestimate how long something is going to take. Just to give you a perfect example, this happens every day. The judge says, let's take a 10-minute break. It's not a 10-minute break, it's a 17-minute break. The judge thinks it's going to be a 10-minute break, but that's not possible, right? By the time the judge got off the bench, gone back into chambers, attended to a few things, answered a question from inevitably, it's not 10 minutes. And so one of the things I noticed was, let's try to be realistic about how long things actually take so we can plan around that. I very much encourage that. But there is a story about a trial we did. It was not long before the pandemic, so it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, probably 6 years ago. The court, it was a 5-week jury trial, and the court had allotted, each side was going to get 75 minutes for the closing argument. And I did the closing and I sat down. One of my colleagues was timing it, and the timer said 74 minutes and 53 seconds. And okay, right, and I think they saved that screenshot as an example. And I think that's, one of the things that Bijan was probably talking about. If you sort of, to zoom out a little bit from that, what I'm very keen on, let's be realistic and look at how things actually happen, not how we'd like them to happen, right? And be honest with ourselves and others about that, right? Make sure we're planning accordingly. And I'll give just one last thing on that. I noticed at some point in life that when you ask people how long their commute is, they always tell you something that's somewhat shorter than the time it actually takes. And how long's your commute? It's 35 minutes. Well, if everything is perfect, it's 35 minutes, but it's normally 45 minutes, right? And it's not because people are trying to lie to you. If anything, they're lying to themselves because that's what they want it to be. And,
they just round that up.
Right. When it comes to time management, I would just say, time is very important. Let's make sure that we're using it wisely. And part of that is knowing how long things will actually take.
Well, when I was at law firm, one of the cases I was at trial and I had to do timekeeping at an ITC case.
Yes.
And that was so nerve-wracking.
Lawyers, particularly lawyers who are not used to working on a clock with the timekeeping like that, will tend to go a little bit over. That becomes a propagating error, right? If you're 5 minutes over with each witness, at the end, you have no time left. You can't do the last witness. And when I saw that, I said, we have to be both realistic and disciplined, and let's try and teach ourselves to be that.
So one of the things, with your new law firm model, I wanted to kind of explore with you in terms of some of the learning curves that you had while building Groombridge, Baughman Stone. I believe that you indicated that you had served in management roles in big law.
That's right. Yeah.
How does that differ when you were basically were in a big firm in much more structure to sort of having flexibility, but at the same time, you're now accountable. Really, you're accountable in both ways.
You're very accountable. And there's some commonality to it. I probably knew this, but I didn't understand the significance of it, is that in a large law firm, you have massive access to infrastructure. And there's somebody, for every function, there's somebody whose job it is to do that. And when we started here, we were very much like a startup, and everybody has to do everything, right? And one thing I remember that Jennifer Wu took a photo of me putting up name signs outside people's offices, right? And she said something, it's a startup, everybody does everything, right? And so, there's that element, which is part of what makes it fun, but also there's a lot of things that until you've tried to do them, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so our health insurance was one of them, right? I said when we started this, let's just get everybody the same health insurance that they had at Paul Weiss. And we were working with, and we still work with, a very, very good insurance broker. And I was on the phone with them when I said that, and there was a kind of pause, and then there was a little bit of someone laughed nervously, and then they launched into this explanation, and I could tell they were trying not to be patronizing, but they explained very carefully to me that not only was that not possible, it would actually be illegal in New York State, right? That that the way the insurance laws work, what's called a large group, which is what Paul Weiss is, can have a certain kind of coverage, and what's called a small group, which is what Groombridge Wu is, carriers can't offer the same coverage to both of those. And so, and there were a lot of things that we had to learn. I think one of the things was that providers would always want to downsell us. You think when you're dealing with a vendor that the dynamic is they're going to be trying to upsell you. But here, and again, the health insurance is a very good example. When we were talking to one vendor who we didn't end up using, I remember they kept saying to me, do you realize how expensive what you're asking for will be? And, we could give you a different plan that'll cost half as much. And I kept saying to them, look, I want the people who work here to feel like they have the best health plan that they've ever had, right? And of course it's going to be expensive. But it felt like I could say that 3, 4, 5 times. The people I was talking to, they couldn't really believe it. He says that, but he really can't. He must not really mean it, right? We just went round and around and around with them trying to offer me cheaper alternatives. And finally, I, came to the conclusion, it's not going to work, right? I need someone else here, right? And, so there were a number of examples like that. I think also on IT, it was easy to underestimate our needs. We started off with a vendor who came very highly recommended. They had worked with a friend of mine who has a law firm that's about 20 lawyers, patent prosecution law firm. He spoke very highly of them. And what became clear as we were going on working with them was that our needs were much more like those of a large law firm. I would say, look, I need every lawyer to have access to, 100 terabytes of information, within 10 seconds, right? I need that access from the cloud anywhere in the world. Someone's in Amsterdam and they lose their laptop. I need you to be able to drop ship them a replacement so they have it in 12 hours. And these were all things where it was sort of like, well, that's sort of not what we do. And it became clear again, right? Our needs are really much more like in certain areas, our needs are more like a large law firm than a small law firm. We have to know ourselves and be realistic about that. At that point, we were doing everything for ourselves. Now we have a very talented chief technology officer who actually was the CTO at Finnegan.
I know, John Cutler.
John Cutler, right? And
that is awesome.
He's awesome, right? But at the beginning, we were doing these things kind of by ourselves. And some of that was the learning of that's what I mean when I say you don't know what you don't know, right? Those are examples of what the kind of learning process.
Yeah, when you talk about health insurance, because I was a paralegal going into business, and I had another paralegal that was at a large firm that decided, that also decided to come out and do her own thing. Through networking, I learned about her and I talked to her before I exit my firm. She was very, very awesome and given me a lot of advice. And because we are in a different space, she's in litigation, she does trial support. I'm in PTAB filing, and I don't necessarily, I'll go to cover for cases, but most of the time it was remote. Well, I guess we don't know how things are going to work now, but it was so amazing. She was talking to me about the billing rate. And this is before when I first started. And so one of the things that I found really trial and error. So I was always thinking, because I'm not a lawyer, so I don't necessarily need to have business insurance. Wrong, right? Yeah, right. Wrong.
That was another thing with malpractice coverage we had to learn about very quickly, right?
One of my attorney actually used to tell me, she's really in high places in a big pharma firm, company. And then she said to me, I think you need to buy liability insurance. Yeah. I said, no, I'm not an attorney. They cannot really sue me for malpractice or anything like that. It's you work with lawyers. They're going to sue you. If something goes wrong,
It's always a good idea to have liability insurance.
She said that for your peace of mind and also so that you could sleep at night, I suggest you go out and look for liability insurance. So I did. And then as soon as I got my insurance, I text her and was I can sleep at night now. Thank God I don't touch wood. I have not had to use it. My clients are attorneys, and even though I know what I'm doing, it's still coming off of the mindset as a paralegal, case manager. So in firms when it's hierarchical, I always know that, you could offer your advice. People either take it or not take it. Yeah. But sometimes when you know that people are going into that path that you really don't want to see, and then after that, you've done your part. And when I was at a firm, I felt much more comfortable because it's still within the umbrella coverage of a firm. But when you are on your own, it can be very nerve-wracking.
Right. That we've been fortunate and have not had any situations where we felt like we might need insurance coverage. But I know from past experience that they can come up very quickly, right? It's the thing that you didn't expect. And that's the situation you're trying to guard against. Something gets overlooked, right? Classically, with lawyers, missing deadlines is the big risk, right?
Well, I'm going to ask one serious question and then maybe a not so serious question. So do you want to do the serious first or do you want to not serious first?
Let's do the serious one first. first.
Okay.
Right?
There's a lot of changes in the patent space.
Yes.
What trends do you think that we should watch out for in IP law, particularly regarding technological advancements?
Well, I mean, I think it's a sort of truism that AI, generally and sort of machine learning are going to change a lot of things. I think in our area, one of the things we should all be looking at is how can we make use of newly available tools to not to replace human beings, but to take out, to do better some of the kind of drudge work. I'm hopeful that as we get to much better learning and understanding models, a lot of things like large-scale document review can be automated in a way that it really hasn't been up to now. I mean, I think in terms of our actual workload, what we're working on, also those technologies will change things like the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries, where a lot of our practice is in that area, and the law there is heavily influenced by the fact that those are technological areas that are unpredictable. And I think one of the things that we will see over the coming years, that greater predictability, which in turn will have a cascade of effects on how patent law works in those areas. There will be effects on IP law from the geopolitical era that we are living in now, right? So, and I think we see some of those already, but things like the increasing importance of trade secrets law is something that I think, is driven by a set of forces that are at work here, including competition between the US and Europe and China that, will have effects on the law. I mean, many people believe that we have been through an era of patent rights being weakened. My own view is that process has probably come to an end. And if we look back historically, there's a long history of patent rights getting weaker and stronger and weaker and stronger, that pendulum going back and forth.
Yep.
That pendulum is probably now moving back, right? And so, those are some of the things I would look at, right? That I think that there are forces at work that will change how IP law is practiced. And like many big picture things, it's hard from one day to the next to perceive it. You kind of have to be able to zoom out in order to be able to see that, right? But those things are going on, and we're living in an era of change, which to me is actually a good thing. I mean, I have taught at several law schools, and one of the things I have said to many, many classes of law students is part of the reason why I love patent law is that it changes so fast. It's complicated, it's intellectually challenging, and very dynamic. And I think all of those things will continue, right? So that's good news. And one of the things I also say is that's good for young lawyers, because the law that I learned 20 years ago isn't law anymore, right? So, you come in with an advantage. Don't underestimate your own abilities.
Wow, that was so insightful. Of course, I don't expect anything less. Share 2 fun things or fun facts about you that most people do not know in the IP community.
The one that people always light on is that, and I'm not sure how widely known this is, but that I race cars competitively. People, for whatever reason, that attracts people's attention. It is correct that I do race Porsches in a couple of different race series. It's a very good way to concentrate the mind, right? That when you're driving a car at 150 miles an hour, you're not thinking about the problems of the workplace, right? So, but another fun fact, I mean, hopefully fun that not many people know, I think, is that I'm active in the environmental movement, and that I'm I'm part of the leadership of an organization called Riverkeeper, which fights to protect water quality in the Hudson Valley and New York City. And that is, I think, very important work, particularly as we're moving into an era where it's not clear how environmental protection will be affected. So that's something that's also one of my significant focuses.
My fun fact is that I love Chinese soap opera.
Well,
I always said that I prefer to be watching other people's drama than living in one.
Right. My daughter shares that love, that she is very keen on Chinese television soap operas, preferably historical ones.
I mean, I watch K-drama too, so, I'm very culturally, yes.
Right, yeah, right. Like K-drama, you can't ignore, right? But,
Yep. Oh, thank you so much. That was such an amazing chat, and I really do appreciate you taking the time. Next time when I'm going to New York, I am going to stop by.
You come by,
and then maybe we'll have coffee at the espresso downstairs.
Absolutely right. See, I'm armed with my cup from downstairs here.
Yeah, I know.
Absolutely, come by, and maybe we, if not espresso, we can go and grab lunch somewhere. This was very enjoyable, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Nick, and I wish that you have a wonderful day, the rest of almost the weekend. And yesterday was Lunar New Year, and today I guess is the second day, so year of the snake. So I wish you great health and prosperity with both your personal well-being as well as your firm.
You too. And we celebrated at my house by eating oranges and apples last night.
I had dumplings.
Yes. Great to see you, and
Thank you.
Sure I'll see you later in the year of the snake.
I am sure. Thank you.